Hi, gang. Donna here. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with Professor Pete Alexander. Professor Pete is a stress relief expert. His best-selling book, Lighten Your Day, Fast, Easy, and Effective Stress Relief, has tips and tools to combat stress. But you may be wondering how this ties into his Better To moment. You see, during his career, he had numerous positions, all coming with a high stress level of stress. One day, all the stress came crashing down on him, and he realized he had a very hard and valuable lesson to learn. Without your health, nothing else matters. Now, welcome, Professor Pete.
Donna, thank you so much for having me on your show.
I will say this, I had one of those moments myself because I came back to work after being out with pneumonia. I came back too
hmm
soon, and I had an employee come over to me and tell me no job is worth your health.
Oh, that's good. That was very insightful of that person.
Yeah, and I never realized it until they said it, and it was just kind of like, oh, because the following week I ended up back out because my pneumonia got worse. So
Well, it's interesting that you say that because if an expert would have told you that, or let's say a significant other told you that, it would have been gone in one ear and out the other. But the fact that somebody who had no stake in the or no
yeah,
stake in your survival and stuff like that tells you this, that I don't know what it is that why we listen to people like that versus the people that really we
yeah.
should be.
My husband would always be like, "Why do you listen to somebody else when I said the exact same thing?" I'm like, I know you said it. I heard you said it, but this is a different thing. It's somebody else saying it. It's confirmation.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
so you're at these high stress positions. I mean, you were a college professor, sales, marketing, all of these things are very
hmm
high stress.
hmm
So what exactly happened to you? How did this all come about? Were you not handling your stress? I know we're not taught how to handle stress.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, it actually for me, stress started when I was a kid. So I grew up in an extremely dysfunctional family, and I had to be the adult in many cases in that situation. And um, then what happened was I carried that stress bearing. I've got to take care of everything, be the stable person. I took that into my adult life. And what happened was in 2008, my body was indicating that I was way overstressed. There were various things happening. And I had this perfect storm of stressful activities. Things like my father was dying, and he needed his affairs to be taken care of. My mom needed major hip surgery, and she didn't have proper insurance to take care of the physical therapy. I had my business that I was running, where I had several employees that needed my attention. My kids were small; they needed my attention, and my marriage was heading for a divorce. So it was all these different
yeah,
things that were going on. And what happened was I got diagnosed with stress-induced diabetes. The crazy thing is that I didn't listen to my body about what stress was doing to it. Instead, what I did was I continued, to burn the candle at both ends for another 10 years, like a lot of us do, until I ended up in the emergency room with a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for your listeners who don't know what that is, basically my body was eating itself alive because of my stress. And we were talking about people who don't have the people that aren't close to you having that impact.
yeah,
Well, so I from the emergency room, they transferred me into the ICU because the doctors said, had I not come in when I did, I was 1 hour from being comatose. That's how bad it was. And my blood sugars were so skyrocketing that the medical grade glucometers could not read them. Well, on my second day in ICU, my numbers had come down a little bit more reasonably. They were still high, but they were more reasonable. And at about 6 a.m., I get a text from my boss at the time. And the text says, "You have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it?" I kid you not. My boss knew I was in the hospital. Okay.
hmm
And so, what a surprise. I didn't have my work laptop with me. So there I am pushing the envelope of my iPhone trying to
Yeah, yeah.
reschedule this webinar. And the nurse who was taking care of me at that time, she comes over and they were checking my blood every hour or so. And she checks my blood and my numbers automatically skyrocketed.
Yeah.
And she says, a matter of factly to me, she says, you realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place. And so there we go, a perfect stranger who had, said something to me. And that was my epiphany moment. And I realized, you know, I am trading my health for my career. And that is a really bad trade.
And this happens all the time. I mean,
Mhm.
speaking, going back to, you were talking about how you were set up before I ended up leaving my job. It was back in 2005. I had become a claim supervisor, so I had a decent job, and my husband was always like, "Well, you can take your boss's office." I'm like, "I don't want my boss's office. I have enough stress now." So I'm managing. I think it was like 10 people. Um, the summer before all my, I would say, yeah, it was this August before I had the pneumonia. We had Katrina coming through. I'm in
Mm,
Illinois, but my
mhm.
family all is in New Orleans.
Okay.
So my grandmother is in a has was in a nursing home. My husband had a stent. This was his first stint. He was diabetic, so it was kind of one of those things. You don't know what's going on. He's going in for chest pain, so you're panicked about that.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know Katrina's coming. As soon as we get him out of the hospital, I find out Katrina's coming. My dad's like, "Oh, don't worry, we're evacuating." I'm like, "Okay, fine." Meanwhile, my boss is now saying, "You're in charge of the office because all of the other supervisors and myself have to go to this other office in Georgia. So you need to handle the office while we're gone, plus go to an actuary meeting, plus make sure you interview some people that are here." I'm like, "Okay." And in the meantime, over that weekend when they're evacuating Katrina, my stepmother dies. And my grandmother's now in a hospital. She's out of the nursing home. She's in a hospital. And when Katrina hit, she's stuck in a hospital for 4 days with rising water. I'm talking to the nurse, and I asked her how she was doing and everything, but it was really nightmares. There had no air or anything because it was, the power was out. So I'm dealing with all the stress, and it continues to build and build and build and build. And I remember sitting at my desk not too long before I got sick, and I'm like, I'm going to quit. And by this point, my grandmother had moved in with us, which was fine. And my other grandmother at one point lived with both of us. But I'm like, I'm going to quit. I can't handle this. When you're sitting at your desk, and I know that my listeners, I'm sure there's some listeners out there that can relate to that moment where you're sitting at your desk and the stress is just piling on top of you. And so I ended up with bronchitis, and that bronchitis shortly turned into pneumonia. And this goes back to your meeting. This is why I'm bringing this up. So I'm out with pneumonia, and there was an employee, the same employee who told me no job was worth my health.
Mhm.
My boss calls me and tells me, "You need to work on writing out his report, writing out the report about getting him fired."
Oh,
Okay. All right. "Do you realize I'm at home with pneumonia?" "Yeah, but you need to do this. We need to get this done, turned in." But I left and came back. And I mean, I was at work from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. one night and finding stuff that I needed to, which somebody else could have found this when they were his employee, when they were, but no. So I'm doing all this and I end up back sick. And then they call me and want me to write this report out. I'm like, really? So this isn't just your boss that says, "Hey, you're in the hospital," but hey, how many times has somebody, I mean, people we know, they their phone rings. I mean, I remember the BlackBerry back in the day. Everybody had a BlackBerry, and those BlackBerries were going off because the boss needed you. When do we unplug?
it's true. I remember my first phone. It was a Palm Treo that
Mhm.
allowed me to get my emails. And I remember thinking to myself at first, I was thinking, this is awesome. I can check my emails on the weekend. And then I realized, oh my God, this just opened up a whole can of worms. And it's true because when if we don't detox from technology, what happens is when we are checking our work messages in the evenings, on the weekends, on our vacation, what actually happens is we effectively have not stopped working. We haven't given our mind or our body the opportunity to recharge. And I'm not talking about, oh, I got my night's sleep. it's really it's that those waking moments where you don't want to be continuously a go 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 go. And how many times have you seen, pre-COVID or now, hopefully things getting a little bit more normalcy, seeing people in a restaurant, and instead of them having a conversation, they're both on their phones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow, so why wouldn't you just get takeout and go back home and do that?
Yeah.
You're in the environment of the restaurant, and why can't you be present with the person that's there? And so one of the things that I learned from this experience is to be more present with my wife when we're having dinner. And it really makes a big difference
Yeah.
because you're not distracted by, any little ping that comes on your phone.
When you were talking about the distress, when I was working, I would pick my husband up at the train station. So we're talking roughly about 5:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30. I'd
Mhm.
pick him up and I would be going on and on and on about work until we went to bed. And finally I started playing a video game. I was playing San Andreas, which is just wrong, and I've never played the game since. But I would play it for hours, and he was like, "Really? Is this helping?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's relieving my stress, no problem." But he would talk about it. He's like, you would pick me up and then you would just go on and on and on because I was just that stressed.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
when does a paycheck versus our sanity? When do we make that definition? And the thing
Right.
is, you need that paycheck because you need your pay your mortgage or your rent,
Right.
you need food on the table. But how do we navigate this?
Yeah, and it's true too. But when it gets to be that bad, the thing is, money is going to mean nothing to you if you are sick in bed, because you know anyone who's experienced that, or let's say anyone who's ever had like the bad flu, if you think about it, you probably didn't have any energy other than to lie in bed.
Hmm.
And when you're sick in bed, you're no good to your work. You're no good to the people that are close to you. You're no good to anybody. And that's the issue, is that when we push, because we think, okay, we have to do it because of money and nothing else, that is a very slippery slope, because, you know, our bodies can take a whole lot, but it'll warn you. And if you keep ignoring those warning signs, whatever the weakest link in your body is, that's going to break down. And in the case for me, no one else in my family has diabetes, but I've got this disease that I have to deal with for the rest of my life,
Yeah.
with the expenses that come with that. Not just the fact that I've got the medical issues with it, but I also have the expenses of the insulin and the pump, etc., that had I listened to my body, I wouldn't have incurred.
Right. My husband was type 1, so I
Mhm.
know exactly. When I left work, I was diagnosed with post traumatic stress disorder. And everybody's like,
Mm.
"How can you have
Mhm.
PSD? You aren't at war, but in
Right.
a way you are. You're
Yes, you
fighting for
are.
your survival. Your mind is fighting for its own survival."
Yes, and it's there's way more cases of that, especially with abusive bosses, because when there's this the boss is treating people so horrendously, and you're so stressed out because you need to try and do everything you can to deliver on whatever the expectations are of that person. It's crazy. And I can't, I shudder whenever I think about several occurrences where I had bosses like that in my career. Primarily early in my career, because when I would have them later in my career, I usually just found a new job. But if you look at all the statistics, people don't leave companies, people leave their supervisors.
Yeah.
It's really true. And so that relationship with whoever you report to is critical for the employee's long-term success. And when a supervisor treats their people horribly, it's you're going to stress those people out, and you're going to burn them out. They're going to likely leave. And if they burn out, that's not going to do you any good either, because you're going to have to find someone else to do that work.
Right.
Because if they, it's just it's a horrible process. And I just strongly encourage people that that there always is an opportunity to find something else, either a different company to work for, or you starting something on your own, or that to because you cannot, well, you can, but it's not a good idea to keep dumping that negative energy inside of your body, because the interesting thing is, our bodies are the same wiring that they were back in the Stone Age. And back then, the stress, fight or flight, let's say,
Yeah.
was designed, for short-term situations where we might have to outrun a T-Rex or a saber-toothed tiger or something like that. But now, most of our stress, of course, is mental. And one of the keys to learn is that most of our stress is self-induced. We do it to ourselves. And so, talking about my ex boss who sent me this text, well, I could have just ignored it, or said, I really can't do anything. Can you find somebody else to do this? But instead I went, oh, I've got to take care of
Right.
that webinar. So I allowed that. And that's one of the key things that early on, for people to realize how much of that stress are we doing to ourselves versus things that we cannot control. And if we can focus on what we can control, our mindset, what we do, it is a big game changer, because whenever we focus on what we can control and what we can affect change in, then our stress goes down. When we worry about things that are outside of our control, that's when our stress goes up.
I think, you touched on something when we first started, that, your role as a kid wasn't necessarily as a kid. You had to be the parent. And I get that. I
Correct.
mean,
Hmm.
you know, I came from a lovely home as well. And you're not taught coping skills, you're taught how to adapt. For me, I had a mother who was undiagnosed bipolar, and I'm sure a couple other things. So you never knew who you were going to get. One
Oh.
minute you would have somebody that was very supportive, and the next minute you would have somebody that was just like, go away, I don't need. So navigating stress was never, you just navigated life.
Hmm.
And we didn't teach people in school, and hopefully they're getting better about it. We didn't teach them how to deal with stress, or how to deal with it. When you're thinking about school, and I know some people are like, well, parents should be teaching kids how to garden, parents should be teaching these life skills. But if the parents are so stressed out themselves from dealing with their own job and trying to put food on the table, how are they going to be able to teach their kids how to maintain and learn how to pass up stress? I've talked to some
Correct.
guests that have great skills, and they have situations where they've taught their kids how to meditate and how to handle the stress. But, you know, stress modification, in your eyes, do you feel that it should be a family thing?
If in part of the support that a family gives, absolutely. But you're absolutely right too about, there's families that, they're in just sheer survival mode. That's literally how it felt like for me growing up. I grew up in an alcoholic family, and so the you didn't know, you know what craziness was that the alcohol induced personalities were going to create. The thing that I found as a parent myself is that what I always did when my kids were growing up is, whenever I was dealing with something that seemed to be a challenge with my kids, I found myself often thinking about, what would my mom do? What would my dad do? And I'd almost always do
Do
the
the opposite.
opposite.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But there's always that moment where something slips out of your mouth, and you're like, "Oh my god, I sound just like they did."
Exactly.
Always.
Yeah. Yep. So there's still stuff there that that happens, and it goes. But The other thing that helps me when it comes to thinking about what happened to me as a kid is that forgiveness is huge. It's absolutely huge. And one of the things that I find is that if you can learn to forgive people, and there's different activities you can do to have forgiveness. Um, if you can have forgiveness and also have gratitude for those people, that is a huge game changer. And so, in a family dynamic where, there's, always going to be the parent and the sibling or the child and or their siblings always fighting. If you can teach them those two things, it's huge. It is absolutely huge because the gratitude will bring that positive energy out, and the forgiveness will hopefully remove a lot of that negative baggage that is festering inside of the person. And that's the thing is that it's not we're not looking at trying to get rid of all stress, because not all stress is bad. And that's what a lot of people think, oh, I'm stressed. Well, so there is good stress. I mean, it's called eustress, and it basically helps us get things done when we're working on stuff that we like to do. So that is good stress. But when we focus on negative stress, and in my experience, negative stress tends to be two different flavors. There's the rumination, where we're worried about something in the past, and in the past we can't change it,
Right.
but yet we continue to worry about or have guilt about something we either did or didn't do. That does not serve us any good. Get rid of it, let it out. Write a letter to somebody that you don't even have to send, or just do some sort of forgiveness of yourself or other people. The other flavor is anxiety about something that may or may not happen in the future. So, like for example, going back to my being in the hospital bed, and I get this text from my boss, and I'm going, oh my God, I'm going to look really terrible and blah, blah, blah. So when we start worrying about something that may or may not happen in the future, we often manifest that exact outcome
Yep.
instead of just living in the present. If we can eliminate those two, the rumination of the past and anxiety of the future, that will be complete game changers for people. It's absolutely true.
The one thing I will say, we've talked about work stress and we talked about family stress. I had stress that I didn't even realize I had.
Mm.
In 2019, September 2019, my husband went in for a procedure for his heart, and I was told at that time that he was on borrowed time.
Oh,
Okay, well, there's the reason why I'm going to say this. Nobody, I talked to his cardiologist. His cardiologist was very good, told me everything I need to know. Nobody bothered to tell my husband. So I go to pick him up from the hospital. I'm like, did anybody talk to you? No. Everybody said, they said the surgery was fine. Everything was fine. I'm like, okay. So his now, I'm going to say this to the people that are listening, since I'm talking to a diabetic. My husband was the poster boy for bad diabetics. He
mm,
became diabetic, I think, at 20, 21 years old. He was very meticulous about losing weight. And then he had a friend tell him, hey, you want that donut? All you got to do is work with your insulin. And I'm not going to get into how he did it, but he did it. And I would get after him about taking his numbers. And he's like, oh, I know what it is. And he could tell you by taste what his numbers were without pulling his blood sugar. And he
oh
would
my
prove it
gosh.
to me. This is how good he was when he was good. So kidney failure, we have the works. So his kidney PA comes in, his physician assistant, and I said, nobody's talked to him. Somebody needs to have this conversation. I don't want to have it.
Mhm.
So she talked to him, and they let him out without oxygen. And we were driving home, and he had a panic attack. And so luckily we were by an ER, and in the ER, he had a panic attack, which is shooting up his heart rate, which is not good. And being a diabetic for 20, for 40 years, I guess, close, about 30 something, they couldn't find a vein, because diabetes, folks, if you don't know this, diabetes will kill your kidneys, will kill your veins, it'll kill everything it can. And so they were trying to get veins in his feet. And a diabetic's worst nightmare is to lose their limbs because of
Hmm.
diabetes. So
Hmm.
he's having a panic attack. He's crying. He says, I don't want to lose you. So this begins this whole journey. And I found myself writing, because I'm a writer, I found myself writing a character who was dealing with the loss of her husband. And my husband was still here. So fast forward to June of last year, my husband, I pick him up from dialysis. Everything seems normal, and something happens. He thinks his sugar's low. So we stop at Burger King, which was less than 5 minutes from where we left. He says he's drinking. I've had him go low before. He's not drinking. I'm trying to get his attention. He turns his head to the side and he collapses. The reason why I'm going through this whole story is, so this was like a whole, almost a year I went through this. And after he passed, I went to my primary care doctor, which was also his primary care doctor. And she looks at me and she says, do you realize the amount of anxiety and stress you were under? I'm like, no, I didn't. I had no idea. I thought it was my life. My concern was for him. I wanted to make sure he was okay. You don't think about that as stress. And the reason why I bring this up is because there's a lot of people our age and younger that have dealt, and even older, that have dealt with having to take care of a parent, a grandparent, a kid, somebody that's in a terminal situation. And how do you deal with that? Because you're taking it internally because you're doing what you have to do. And it's different than a job and a boss telling you, you need to pick up that phone. This is somebody you love and care about. So there's another layer to emotion to it.
Hmm.
So, how do you deal with that in your eyes when you're trying to
Oh,
go through that?
yeah, that is a tough one. The thing is that first and foremost, you have to take care of yourself first,
Hmm.
first and foremost, because um, going back to what we talked about, if you end up getting sick and you're lying in bed, you're not going to be able to take care of that loved one.
Right.
You're just not going to. So you have to prioritize your own self care. And that own self care does not have to take a huge amount of time. It could be as simple as taking 5 minutes a day to,
Sorry.
oh, hello, ring.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It doesn't take more than 5-10 minutes at the absolute most. Go for a walk. You mentioned meditation a little earlier. Um, be able to talk with a friend. Do something that you can regularly do, and make it a habit. Because one thing that I notice a lot of people who are dealing with that, and that's that and taking it all on themselves and saying, oh, okay, I'll take care of myself after my spouse, my mom, my dad, my kids, whatever it is taken care of. But if you can make a habit out of it where the same time every day, and if for those of us who use a calendar, you block that few minutes a day where it reminds you to do that activity, and you treat it like it is a responsibility, then you get into the habit of saying, okay, I need to do my 10 minutes of exercise. I need to do my 5-minute walk. I need to do my 5-minute meditation. I need to do just some deep breathing, whatever it happens to be that works for you. Because what I've found out is that what might work for you, Donna, may not work for me, and vice versa. So
Right.
you got to find whatever works for you, and prioritize that. And even if it is that 5 minutes a day, it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you get into the habit of doing that daily, the compound benefits over time will be enormous, but you have to prioritize and start today to do it. And that would be no matter what you're facing, that would be the number one thing to take on, and find that one thing that helps you.
That's one thing I'm thankful I'm a writer because I did not intentionally write this character to go through suffering the loss of her husband, and it was really surreal because I would sit here and I would work on writing it, and I'm crying, getting all this emotion out, and my husband would come by to go to the bathroom and be like, "Hi, honey," and I'd stop the tears. I'm like, "Hi," and everything would be
Mhm.
fine, and I'd go back to writing and I cry, and it helped a lot. But now we're coming up on the year, and because of COVID, we didn't do anything, and I'm in a situation now where we're I'm talking with his best friend about doing something, and I had put it all together. I did a collage, and it gutted me. And I'm sitting here with a smile on my face, but I was totally destroyed. So I canceled it yesterday. And he called me a little while ago before this podcast, and he's like, "Well, we should do this still. It might be better to do it now and get that closure, but I'm just not sure I can because it's like it's still so raw.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
with COVID, we still don't have that support system in place. That so it's like I'm not sure I really want to do that yet. It's not that it's a good idea and it needs to be done, but it's hurt. It hurts.
Yeah, and I think that you have to listen to what, whatever it is on your inner, your inner child is saying on that.
Hmm.
And if it is too much to deal with right now, don't do it.
Yeah.
Don't do it. I mean, you have to honor yourself and feel and doing something like a big collage. I can only imagine how painful that would be because of all the different pictures that you would be having, and each picture is going to bring back a particular memory. So it's not. It's taking more of those baby steps to be able to move forward and just honor what's inside of you and just say, okay, does this feel right?
Well,
Because
go ahead.
I mean that because uh you know it's similar to doing any kind of an activity where there's somebody that you really care about, that whether it's journaling, whether it's writing, whether it's doing the collages or a scrapbook or whatever it happens to be. It's it the thing that we have to remember is that there could be pent up emotion that does need to come out. Our unconscious wants to release it. And if an activity like that allows us to release it, that is a positive thing.
Right.
So and it might be something where for you in particular, where you're able to, you start it, you get that emotion out, then you come back to it, the next time, some more emotion comes out. But each time you're letting out whatever needs to come out. And at some point, I would imagine you would be able to say, okay, I can do this. I can do
Right.
this now.
I mean, I honored myself last year when after he died around August. I'm like, okay, you can choose to go with your normal comfort, which would be to eat badly and gain weight, or you can choose to get healthy. That's what you're still alive. He's not. So I did. And I started working on losing weight, and I have lost weight and I'm still working on it. But, you know, maybe I haven't dealt with anything or dealt with everything that I think I have. It's one of those things where you kind of bottle it down and you think you're doing a lot better than you are sometimes.
Hmm.
I came to the realization the other day. It's like I recorded a podcast in the morning and I'm like smiles like I am right now with you. But I got off the podcast and I started crying
Hmm.
because we present one face to the world, and then internally we don't necessarily show it, and that's stress, that's anxiety, that's everything rolled into one, and that can, and I'm well aware, can take you down.
Yeah, it can. But I also believe that we shouldn't apologize for that. We shouldn't. It's it's being vulnerable. And when I remember, so one of the delights that I had as a kid is my I was the one who found a family member who had committed suicide. And I was angry, went through the emotion of the anger. And I remember it wasn't until uh roughly 5 months later, and there was something I had just talked to somebody about him. And and I was fine, of course, publicly I was
Yeah, yeah,
fine. I
yeah.
kept
The
the
facade.
armor on, the
Yeah,
facade, the stage
yeah.
presence, right? Of course, that we all do, the stage presence. And then I all of a sudden, when I was by myself, I just had to let it out. I had to cry. And the thing is that allowing ourselves to cry and not beating ourselves up about it is um, a healthy thing. we have to let that that emotion needs to come out. I had another example where I remember I was flying on a plane. I was coming home, and I was doing this activity, this inner child activity, and I was coming back from a business trip, and I remember I was luckily I was on the window seat, and it was an activity where it said something about do some sort of drawing or artwork um, that you like to do as a kid. And so I remember this activity that you could make almost like a totem pole out of handwriting with a pencil. And so I started doing that, and I did that little drawing, and all of a sudden I connected with my inner child for the first time in probably 30, 35 years.
Hmm.
And I started crying. And I remember I looked out the window as I'm crying.
Lovely
Because
view, lovely
exactly,
view.
exactly. But I had to let it out
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it needed to come out. And it just we have to honor ourselves that way. We absolutely do, because if the more we keep it bottled in, it's just going to fester inside of us, and even if it's screaming into a pillow, or what have you, find something that can help release that negative energy. It just has to get out there. And our unconscious mind absolutely wants to get rid of it. Our conscious mind is the one that says, well, we are not supposed to, we have to keep this professional facade on, and it's and there's no crying in baseball, if you remember that Tom
yeah,
Hanks
yeah,
line. It's that kind of stuff that we think, oh, okay, we're supposed to keep strong and not show our our vulnerability, but it's so much better and so much more calming to be able to let that out.
yeah. The suicide thing, I get, my mom did it. So I
I'm
didn't find
sorry.
her. But here's the thing, she wanted me. This is how twisted my mom was. My mom actually called me. I was living in Dallas at the time, and she lived in Shreveport. She didn't end up doing it then, but she had been playing this game about doing it for years. And I had saved her before. But this time, she calls me and she's like, I want you to come find me. I'm like, excuse me? Now, I am 22 years old. I want you to come find me. I'm like, what do you mean you want me to come find you? I'm going to do it in the shower in the master bath, and I want you to come find me.
Oh my gosh.
She's gonna shoot her.
Oh
So,
my God.
and I'm like, if you loved me, you wouldn't ask me to do that.
Mhm.
But and she didn't get the rationale. I mean, she had put me through living hell for a month straight. And I mean, I was not married to her. I couldn't back then. It was the 80s. You really didn't have, or early 90s, psych holds and stuff. I mean, she had tried to commit suicide when I was in high school, and I called the paramedics, saved her. She was in a coma for 3 days, and then she was in a psych hold, and she convinced them that she was burned out. So they let her out. She had no treatment, nothing. So fast forward, and yeah, she was on a mission. Ultimately, she was on a mission because talk after she did it, my dad's like, "Oh yeah, when you were little, she tried it too." Well, it would have been nice to have known that,
Mhm.
but I mean, it was the perfect storm. And to me, when somebody does that to you, so there's another little stress nugget. I mean, that whole month, and she wasn't only doing it to me; she was doing it to my grandmother too.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, people don't like suicide is such a dicey thing because there are some people that legitimately don't want to do it. It's a cry for help, and then there's other people that are just manipulating. And after my mom did it, I had a very close friend at the time who liked to play this game with me, and she would sit there and say, well, I just have no life. My life's not worth living. I should kill myself. She never intended to even harm herself, but she knew because that was a trigger for me, she could play me.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
people have to be careful with stress when it comes to triggers because people will use those triggers against you to get a reaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important for us to know what our triggers are. And so if you can keep inventory of those, um, and it's pretty easy to identify. And in fact, there's a tool that I found online that can help you identify them as well that I can share with you,
Okay.
so you can share with the listeners. Um, it really is important because our awareness, our self-awareness of, okay, that's pushing my button. And if you're, that if you can be aware of it, you are actually in some control there. And remember what we were talking about prior, when we feel like we can control something, so our own reactions to
Hmm.
the situation, which is the trigger, we can actually be able to affect change in the way we want it. So the triggers, knowing those triggers is critical. It absolutely is critical. And if you can figure out what it is that is your number one trigger and figure out ways to minimize it, you're not going to eliminate it. Usually you're not going to, because those triggers are typically something that built up over your past. But if you can minimize some of the emotional uh, resistance or whatever it is that gets you to go, like this, I don't want to be around, um, that person because they're triggering me. That Figuring that out and realizing ways to deal with it are powerful. They really are. It's just getting to know yourself and knowing it better, instead of how often we are where we're just reactory. Oh, I hear that particular word and it just
Hmm.
flares me. Or we've all had probably people in our lives that um, just the sound of their voice makes you know makes us cringe. And those are the kind of things where, if we look at it, what is it that's causing that?
My therapist has a great analogy about this because I asked her one time, why do I keep picking certain friends? And she's like, it's like a pothole. You're walking down the street. The first time you fall into the pothole, you're like, well, wait, let me dust myself up, get up, keep walking. Second time you're walking along, you hit the pothole again. But this time you get up really quick because you're like, okay, I recognize it. By the third time, you're like, oh, let me step around it. And by the fourth time, you're like, I'm going to take a different route.
Uh-huh. Exactly. So it's all about learning. It's
Mm-hmm.
all about learning. And that's the thing, for me, it was interesting too, because um, when so in recovering from that dysfunctional childhood and that suicide, etc., what I found, which was very interesting, was that I had lost the ability to like myself. And when I started recovering from that, not only did I learn to like myself, but I actually learned to love myself. And that is a huge mind shift. It really is. Because when we love ourselves, we're willing to focus on, putting ourselves first before taking care of somebody else. It's that classic oxygen mask, on the plane. Put the mask on yourself first before putting it on a child. The reason is because you have to be able to take care of yourself first. You can't do anything for the child if you are not taking care of yourself. And when you start loving yourself and realizing that, yeah, you've made mistakes in the past, there's things that we're not proud of, but if you make amends, or do whatever you need to do to forgive yourself, forgive others, it is amazing what kind of emotional baggage gets removed off of your shoulders. It's amazing.
And that's the thing. We're not taught to love ourselves because, at least for me, if you liked yourself too much, well, then you're being an egotist.
Or arrogant. Yep,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
It's like, you couldn't like yourself too much because then there was a problem. So, and then you had all the outside factors, not just from kids, but your family that were not always complimentary. If you got too big for your britches, we're going to take you down a
Hmm.
couple of notches. Just like
Hmm.
men were not allowed to cry. Boys couldn't
Hmm.
cry. Girls could cry,
Hmm.
but boys couldn't cry. And well, you'd be so much prettier if you lost weight. I look
Oh.
back at pictures of me and I'm like, I wasn't fat. I wasn't real thin, but I wasn't fat.
Mhm.
So it's just all that baggage that how you have to unpack to learn to love yourself. There was a movie, I think it was Terminal Velocity, and I always laugh because it's a bad movie. It's a Charlie Sheen movie, but there was one line that has always stuck with me, and that was "Pack your bags, we're going on a guilt trip."
I remember, my wife and I watched the reruns of the Gilmore Girls,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember the Lorelai Gilmore. She said something about her mom, and she said, um, it's the mom's emotional baggage has arrived, and boy, is it heavy.
But I mean, the thing is, we do have emotional baggage. It's just a matter of, are you using it to guilt somebody, or are you
Hmm.
using it to work through? If it's your own baggage,
Hmm.
you can start unpacking it and figuring things out. And that's, as some people call it, shadow work. That's when you're diving deep and you're
Yeah.
figuring out who you are.
Yeah.
And that's the scary thing, because once you start unpacking that stuff, you see layers of yourself, you see layers of your parents, you see
Right.
things that you learned through a different perspective, you
Yeah, and
know?
the shadow work is great because it gives you that insight over, things that you don't like about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, what is that other person doing in there? Another thing that I found is extremely powerful to get rid of emotional baggage is this technique called mental and emotional release. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that,
Mm-mm.
but
No.
yeah, MER is powerful because what it does is it allows the person who's having the MER done to them to go back into their past and figure out what is the source event that's causing all these problems and our reactions to a particular situation. Because the source event caused some sort of emotional baggage. And then each time something similar happened throughout our life, it was triggered. And what's amazing about this practice is you are able to go back in your past using your unconscious mind, and if you can eliminate that source event and then eliminate any of the other events that had been triggered by that source event,
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden it's gone. It's like that channel that your unconscious mind has been looking for to get rid of stuff. And it's powerful, and it really is, and it's amazing. In fact, when I had it done to myself, I remember I came back into the office. We were mentioning, earlier about, somebody's voice triggering a negative reaction.
Yeah.
Well, I had somebody I worked with who literally, whenever I would even hear his voice, the hair on the back of my neck would stand up. I just could not stand this guy because he was so arrogant, in
Mm-hmm.
your face. He was just everything uh, personality wise that I cannot stand.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but it was triggering in me. And I remember after having that done, I come back in on Monday morning, and um, he comes in and I hear his voice. And instead of the hair on the back of my neck standing up, it's like, oh, there he is. So
Nice.
you don't go from being triggered by him or that person to liking them. But what it does is it basically flatlines that negative emotion. And that's fantastic because
Yeah.
then it doesn't trigger you anymore.
Yeah. I mean, there was a woman at my job who had the same name as me. At the
Hmm.
time, I was dressing down. I was not there to impress anybody. I was in a relationship, and I was just there to do my job.
Hmm.
She was flawless hair, flawless makeup. She'd spray Evian mist on her face, and she didn't do any work. This is the employee she wanted me to fire was her employee, and I found mail on his desk that had not been put in a file for 2 years when he
Oh my
was her
gosh.
employee. And so she comes in for my final review, and the universe conspired to get me out of there. So that's how I got out of there. But She comes in for my final review, and she lets me rate it, and I'm just looking at her, and she's like, "Well, don't you have something to say?" And I knew she wanted me to react, and all I did was look at her and said, "It is what it is. It
Mhm.
is what it is." But don't you?
Mhm.
Nope, don't have anything to say. As soon as I left, I was like, "Ah," but and I was like, "I'm gonna write a rebuttal," and my husband's like, "Let it go. Just don't even worry about it." He ended up shutting the recliner. We had a reclining love seat, and he ended up shutting it on my foot, and that began this whole. My stress took over and it messed up with my back, and I had ankle surgery. It was just a
Mm.
mess, but ultimately it was a lifesaver because once I was out of that environment, I realized how toxic it was and how the stress was eating at me and physically affecting me.
Yeah.
So that's why I say divine intervention. When he closed the thing on my foot, it was like, oh no, but ultimately
Hmm.
it ended up being divine intervention. So let's talk about your book a little bit.
Sure.
So
So,
go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was
You were
just
going
gonna
to
say,
say.
tell us about it.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. So it's basically lighten your day, fast, easy, and effective stress relief. That's what it looks like. Um, and what it is it's a approximately 125 different stress relief techniques that are broken down by the 7 areas of our lives that I found during my research for the book that are causing us stress. If we talked earlier about the fact that most of our stress is mental and most of our stress is self-induced. We do it to ourselves. So what can we control? We can only control ourselves. So the 7 areas that we tend to stress ourselves out in is our livelihood or our career. That's the L. I stands for imagination or your conscious mind, which is only 5% of your brain, but it's where your inner critic lies. We all love that.
Mm-hmm.
The G is for your genius or your unconscious mind, because that's where real change happens. The T is for time. I'm sorry. The H is for your physical health. T is for the time you have available. E is for your environment, and N is for your network of relationships, because the people around you, work,
Yeah.
personal life, etc., they're all going to cause you stress as well. So the different techniques are categorized by the different areas of your life that you can work on. And so the great thing about it is it's not designed to be, okay, I'm going to pick this book up and I'm going to read it from cover to cover. No, the intent of the book is for the reality of, I've got 5 minutes before I have to have either a challenging conversation or I've got to go into this meeting or whatever it happens to be. Give something a try.
Okay.
And if it works for you, run with it and do that every day over and over again, because it's going to benefit you. And if it doesn't work, big deal. You tried it for a couple minutes, try something else next time. And you will find there's not a single person who hasn't found at least one or two techniques that work for them.
Awesome. So there is something I didn't touch on, and it's a very big little word, which is fear.
Oh, yeah. Well, fear is a wonderful acronym. So, fear, what I like to remind people about is that fear is actually an acronym that stands for fictional evidence appearing real.
Okay.
Fictional evidence appearing real. And it primarily are that negative emotion is around fear and often about things going, the anxiety about something that's going to happen in the future. And what is so great, let's say if we have fear about interviewing for a new job, fear about having a conversation with somebody, fear about whatever it is that you don't think you can do. Instead, ask yourself the following question: what would I do if I knew I couldn't fail? Think about that.
Yeah.
The instead of that stuck state of fear where we can't do anything, it opens up the world of possibilities.
Well,
That's go ahead.
I was gonna say, and not only that, you're opening up the possibility of manifesting.
Yes, absolutely. Because it's, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? So you're thinking about, where could I go with this? And I have worked with people from so many different age ranges where this is a home run. In fact, my youngest son, when he graduated high school, he was beating himself up so badly because he just didn't know what he wanted to do. I mean, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was that age, but he just, I don't know, and he got into this stuck state because he's his own worst enemy. And so I asked him that question. I said, I want you to think about what you would do if you knew you couldn't fail, and I don't want an answer right now. Think about it a day or two. And a couple of days later, he comes back to me. And first of all, an 18-year-old, he says to me, Dad, that was a really interesting question that I really liked you asking me. And I thought to myself, a teenager just complimented me. So right. And
Yeah.
so so there was so
What
obviously
Twilight
this
Zone episode are you in?
so but he thought about it. He came back with three completely off the wall, out in left field kind of ideas. And that was 2 years ago, and he's pursuing one of those now.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Nice.
it really, and he went from that just being, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it, to actually chasing after something that he really, really wants. And to your point about manifesting, it's all about, having that positive outcome. And because if you think positively and you send out that positive energy, going back to our gratitude discussion earlier, you send out that positive energy, you're going to attract that positive energy back. But the opposite goes as well. If you are negative, 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 you are going to attract back negative outcomes. It's just the way the universe works.
And if you're manifesting out of, I don't want to say need, but out of dire, that you're just so locked up in fear and worry and everything else, and you're not doing it out of appreciation and gratitude, it is going to fail. You're not going to get what you want. You'll get
Mm-hmm.
something you don't want. It's kind of like, because I read cards, like the hangman. If you sit there and you
Mm-hmm.
don't make a decision, and you sit there and swing on the breeze and don't make a decision will be made for you. And
Yes.
if you can sit there and complain about it, but you had the power. It's like Glinda the Good Witch. You had the power all along. Yeah,
It's true.
it was sweet when I was a kid, but now, you just want to go, you really want to say something to Glenda. That's not so nice, but
Well, and the other thing too is that when we make a decision, it's a huge relief,
Mhm.
one way or the other, because now we're not worried. In fact, you were saying about reading the cards. I use a pendulum
Okay.
to, with a yes or no answer, and because the pendulum will give you the whatever the answer is that's right for you, because your subconscious is going to send that through micro muscle movements in your body. So people think that's that's magic, or is that can't be right. It's like,
Uh-huh.
look up the scientific evidence on it. It is
I,
absolutely true.
I actually had a gentleman that I just released the podcast today, and he's a neuroscientist. He's in Japan, and he wrote a
Hmm.
book of tarot and dowsing. And we were talking about the fact that, in layman's terms, because he studied with Edgar Casey, you
Mm,
know, if you want to do layman's terms, Star Wars, the Force. We're all bound together. We're all connected. Because my husband used to go, well, how do you know? At least initially. Now, after a certain point, he just gave up asking because he figured it out. But we're all connected, and we can make manifest the positive. But if we're all living in fear, we're just bringing more darkness toward us.
absolutely,
You know,
absolutely.
and COVID, that has been. We've lived a year in fear.
Hmm. Hmm.
So how do we now turn this around and move forward and push for change and to get out of our own way and
Well,
not
and
live
we
in fear?
exactly, and it all starts really with the only person that you can control, and that's yourself.
Hmm.
It's the only one. You have to change your mindset. You have to start believing in yourself. You have to start thinking positively. That's the only way it's going to happen.
Yeah, 100% agree. I thank you for your time. This has been a very fascinating conversation.
Well,
I
it's
hope
my pleasure.
so. I hope my listeners enjoyed, and I will have all that information up in links so you can find out about the trigger release program as well as his book and other information. So thank you guys for tuning in, and Catch you next time.